Good evening, everyone. Welcome back to another wonderful tasting with the Virtual Tasting Society. I am Vadim Perlovsky, and today we are excited to try the oldest American single malt made in America, I guess, officially. McCarthy's is here. We're excited to welcome back Caitlin from Hood River Distillers.
Hood River Distillers, Clear Creek Distillery, one and the same. I can explain how they work later if anybody has a question about it.
Awesome. Yeah. So welcome back. Thank you very much for joining us. I know last time you talked about fruit brandies, which is your passion. I
Yeah.
understand.
Uh-huh.
You are the most knowledgeable and passionate person I've met about fruit brandies, and
Well, you probably haven't met Andy Garrison over at Stoneborn then, because I think he outweighs me on the passion for fruit brandies by at least one, if not several orders of magnitude.
I'm happy to. I would be happy for that introduction. Yeah, for sure. But today we are tasting McCarthy's single malt American whiskey and Trails End Kentucky bourbon finished in Oregon. Did I say all those
Yeah,
things correctly?
yeah.
So we're super excited. We have 6 expressions in front of us, 3 of one, 3 of the other. Do you want to tell us what order we're going to taste in so we can line them up?
Yeah. I think I'm going to be a little unfair to your palates. Well, do I choose to be unfair to your palates? Why don't we start with the bourbons first? I was all geared up to do McCarthy's first, but realistically, if we're going to be doing this in the correct order, we really should start with the bourbon before we go to a smoky, peaty American single malt. So go ahead and set up your Trails End 8 first.
We'll do Trails End 8, and then the other 8, and then the 10, or like,
Yeah, correct. So the Trails End 8, the Trails End 8 apple brandy cask finish, and then the Trails End 10 would be the third out of the bourbons.
okay.
So some quick backstory when this would actually be a great place to explain Clear Creek and Hood River Distillers. Clear Creek Distillery was founded in 1985 by a man named Steve McCarthy. Because he'd fallen in love with European fruit brandies while traveling with a separate company. He came back and was like, I'm not really sure what to do with myself. I'm in my 40s. He had sold the company that he'd been traveling with for what he claimed a sack of cash, and wasn't really sure what to do with himself. And he had a branch of the family tree that was still growing pears and pear orchards in the Hood River Valley, and they were having a hard time getting a good price for their pears. And he was like, "Well, I love this French pear eau de vie. Why don't I start a distillery?" Unbeknownst to him, he was starting the third craft distillery in the country at that point in time. Hood River Distillers, founded in 1934, essentially doing the same thing. They were pulling cull fruit out of the Hood River because there's always been lots of orchards in the Hood River Valley. And in the 30s, it was like, hey, we don't need this fruit anymore. Let's dump it in the river and it'll magically disappear. So they would collect it out of the river and mash it up and turn it into fruit brandy. When Steve was getting close to retirement, he was in his early 70s. He was looking for hopefully in his mind, smaller, local, hopefully family-owned company with a reputation of taking care of their employees that would potentially be able to buy Clear Creek from him and continue on with not only the idea of the brand, but also his ethos in both business and spirits production. And little did he know that about the same time he was looking for a buyer, Hood River Distillers was looking to get back to their roots. In the late 50s, early 60s, they closed down all their distilling operations and just became a rectifier, which means that they were buying bulk spirits and then doing the blending and packaging them in-house. And they were like, you know what, this has been really great, but with an eye for premiumization, I think it would be really awesome if we could get back to making fruit brandies, but also get back to owning our supply chain for some of our products from the very beginning, from the raw ingredients all the way through to the end. And so Steve, with an eye for retirement, knocked on Hood River Distillers' door and said, hey, I don't know if you're interested, but you want to buy Clear Creek? And they actually essentially had a blank check in hand, start a distillery. And they were like, well, we were going to buy a still and try to figure out how to start our own distillery again, but buying yours sounds way better. So it was really kind of, the stars aligned. The sale went through in 2014. And again, with Hood River Distillers buying Clear Creek with their eye of premiumization, that is really how the Trails End line came to be. Hood River Distillers' probably best known product would be Pendleton whiskey, which they sold to Proximo a handful of years ago. That was their first big project into moving out of more value brands and into the premium spirits market. And while they were working on growing Pendleton whiskey, Ron Dodge, the current, he used to be the CEO, but now he's not. He's the president of the board. The president of the board and the representative of the family that still majority owns Hood River Distillers was continuing his eye towards growing that premium portfolio. And so seeing that bourbon was on the cusp of having the moment that it's currently having, he started buying up all of these beautiful stocks of gorgeous Kentucky bourbon in the hopes that at some point the plan would manifest with something to do with it. So fast forward, he's working on Pendleton, buying all this bourbon. He purchases Clear Creek Distillery. And then he's like, I have all this bourbon just back here in my back pocket. I still don't really know what to do with it. But now, I've just got this company now that's just a whole bevy of spirits nerds. Maybe I'll ask the spirits nerds what they think I should do with it. So he just like brought it to Clear Creek and was like, hey, so I've got all this 8-year-old Kentucky bourbon. We don't really have a plan for it. What do you think? And Clear Creek Distillery, which we'll get into later, being the house that is built of Oregon oak, our first instinct was like, well, what if you finish it in Oregon oak? Because it's pretty tasty. And that's how the Trails End 8 was born. With the decision to finish it in the Oregon oak, I was sitting on the stills, mind wandering like one does. And I was like, well, it starts in Kentucky and it ends in Oregon. So it's kind of like the Oregon Trail. And then I was like, well, what should we call it? Trailed End. And I got like kind of a like fuzzy feeling in my fingertips, like maybe it was a good idea. And I ran up to the general manager that we had at the time. He was from Hood River Distillers, and he only came in like once every 2 weeks. And he was there that day. And so I like ran up to his office and then like really shyly knocked on his door and like kind of just opened the door and was like, hey, I think we should call it Trails End. Bye. And then just kind of ran away because I was so nervous. And then I kind of forgot about it. 6 months later, we had a big all company meeting, and they're like, well, we talked to all of these, creative designers and brand people and all that, and trying to come up with, a really great name for this bourbon project. And turns out they couldn't do any better than Caitlin. So we're going to call it Trails End. So Trails End has a really special place in my heart, as well as really the continuing story with Clear Creek Distillery and being owned by Hood River Distillers, and bringing this really beautiful premium Kentucky bourbon to Oregon, and then applying these Pacific Northwest heritage culinary finishes to what is already a gorgeous Kentucky bourbon. So when we're talking about the Oregon oak, go ahead and try that first Trails End 8-year. The 8-year is finished, this is the flagship Trails End. It's finished with toasted Oregon oak staves. So we're still working with the same man at Oregon Barrel Works, Rick DeFerrari, that has been making all the Oregon oak casks for Clear Creek Distilleries, for McCarthy's, which we'll try later. And we went back to him because he is the genius behind Oregon oak. And we said, hey, not sure if we necessarily need to invest in the whole casks for this one, but what if you could toast some like wood icicles, and so that we could put them in the tanks and finish the bourbon with these Oregon oak icicles. And he was like, you know what? That sounds like a fun project. Let's see what we can do. And so he was able to take that 3-year air dried, air cured Oregon oak, and then make it into these kind of twined up bundles of staves that we're able to load in the tanks and finish that bourbon on. The difference between the regular 8-year bourbon before it's been staved and then afterwards, and you're going to hear me say this a lot, but it really kind of rounds out and sands off the rough edges of what was already a really great bourbon. So there's already some of those like roasted sweet corn and dark chocolate notes because it is an exceptional Kentucky bourbon. But there's always a little bit, in my opinion, some high notes of like isopropyl and rubbing alcohol that sometimes you get with bourbon. And with the addition of the Oregon oak, that and then both the nose and the palate is just kind of been like smoothed away with the addition of the vanilla and the like fatty roasted nuts and like a little bit of like orange citrus. So it kind of comes together in this really wonderful, like sink your teeth into, have an experience with this bourbon drink.
And when you say Oregon oak, you're talking about Garyana.
Yes, Gary on Oak. Sorry. Oregon oak. We've called it Oregon oak since day one. It's totally not fair to call it Oregon oak. That's its like general name. It actually grows all the way from Northern California all the way up through British Columbia. So just to say that it's Oregon oak and fits within our little square box of a state, it's not really fair. It has a much broader like growing region. But old dogs, new tricks. I grew up calling it Oregon oak before Garyana was cool.
I hear some people in Washington are using it too. Copycat.
Yeah. Uh-huh.
Are you also only able to get it if it like falls on its own type of deal, or are you foresting it somewhere?
I would actually have to ask Rick those questions. We're very lucky in that we've had a wonderful partner in Oregon Barrel Works, and our relationship is that when we need new barrels, we call Rick up and be like, "Hey, this is how many barrels we think we need in the next couple years," and he's like, "You know what? For you, you got it."
Nice. That's a good relationship. This is delicious. Very sweet. Just enough spice to make it not cloying. It's really good.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it works. It works well. Neat. It's a great neat sipper. It doesn't lose its charm with a big ice cube, but it also plays well in all of your favorite bourbon drinks, bourbon classics.
Whoops. Do you talk about where in Kentucky it's coming from?
Nope, I'm not allowed to tell you whose bourbon it is.
Okay.
I
Yours.
can tell you that it's not a wheated bourbon, and then it has about 10% rye. But other than that, I cannot disclose who makes it. But it is really beautiful bourbon. Well, if everybody's, I don't want to go too fast. I know it was kind of a big lead up to get into the first taste, so I'll try not to speed you through the next the next five. The next one is the Trails End 8 Finish in Apple brandy casks. So again, we're digging into the creative sandbox that is the culinary heritage of the Pacific Northwest. Apples play a big part of that, certainly with the history of Clear Creek Distillery as well. And so when we were looking to add new expressions, that was kind of the place that we were playing with, is what says Pacific Northwest, what's going to play really well with this canvas of this 8-year-old bourbon. And when we talk about the kind of specialty finishes that we consider for the Trails End line, I really like to use a spider graph to explain what we're doing. So if you're not familiar with what a spider graph is, imagine if my hand had a million fingers and it actually looked kind of like the bones of a spider web. And each one of my fingers is a descriptor, a flavor or an aroma, right? And anywhere from the center all the way out to the end, that's 0 to 10. So if my pinky finger is vanilla and you're like, wow, there's a lot of vanilla in there, you would place a point on the very end of that spoke to say how much of that flavor it is. And then if this next finger was chocolate and you're like, well, there's not a lot of chocolate, it's going to be in here. And you go around and you name all the things that you smell or taste, and then you kind of rate them on their intensity. And then when you connect that line, you then have a visual representation of the smell and taste of that whiskey, which is kind of cool, right? So when we're looking at these finishes, what we're trying to do, we're not trying to add something really random. I'm not trying to add a whole bunch more fingers and onto my spider graph. But what we're trying to do is we're trying to kind of pluck those strands like the strand, like a guitar, and kind of turn the volume up on a few of those things. So when we looked at what the Oregon oak does, we're accentuating all of these vanilla nuts and all of these roasted hazelnuts. All those qualities already existed in the initial bourbon, but by adding those Oregon oak staves, we've turned up the volume on what you're able to get in that already great 8-year bourbon. And so again, with the apple cask, what we're doing is we're highlighting those baked apple qualities, those kind of green apple highlights, some of those more fruity and floral notes that were already in the bourbon. But by doing this very special finish, we're able to bring it up above those sensory thresholds so that it leaps out of the glass out at you and you're kind of able to find them.
Dumb question, but just making sure. So this is no Oregon oak in this one. It's
Correct.
You take the Kentucky and finish just in the apple.
Correct. Yeah.
And the
And
apple
go ahead.
from where's that?
Yeah, I was like, oh, I forgot to mention that part. So I feel that a lot of times bourbon is fairly wasteful with its oak usage, right? Certainly bourbon barrels from the big bourbon houses, they age a vast majority of pretty much every other spirit around the world. But we want to make sure that those casks get used as much as possible. So we actually have this other really beautiful product, and I hope Vadim brings me back for just an apple brandy tasting sometime in the future, because then you'll get to try it. But we have this product called Old Delicious, which is a double bourbon barreled apple brandy. So we take the bourbon barrels from the Trails End line, and then we put Clear Creek apple brandy in them for a year. After that year, we pull the apple brandy, the 1-year-old apple brandy out. We roll the now apple barrels over to finished Trails End apple. And then we get a new shipment of drained bourbon casks. And we put that 1-year-old apple brandy back into another set of freshly drained bourbon barrels for another year. So that's how you get the double bourbon barreled apple brandy. And so we're able to kind of loop-de-loop these casks through our own product line before we then either sell them or give them away to mostly local breweries to age a bunch of really beautiful like porters and stout, which are my favorites. So I'm really happy to see that continue, because sometimes they bring treats.
And for both of these, I assume you age them at cask strength, whatever that is, and then and then you batch down and
Yep. And then they're brought to proof before bottling. Bulk proof on the 8-year bourbon is, between 118 and 128. Every lot is a little bit different.
This apple brandy cask is delicious. And the spice lingers. I mean, it's on my tongue still.
Mm-hmm.
It goes on and on and on. But as far as tasting the beginning and the middle of the palate, this was softer than the Oregon oak 8 years. Mm-hmm. Interesting, because it's higher proof. How did you guys settle on 52.5? That's an interesting proof point.
We just tasted them. We've got, whenever we release something, sometimes it's the whole new product development team that will go through and pick which one their favorite. Sometimes it's just me on a Friday afternoon, but we'll go through and we'll proof it down to a handful of different proofs. And I had one of the next door neighbors double blind me for, we're going to have a special release apple brandy that's going to come out hopefully this fall. And I had to figure out what proof it was going to be. So the neighbor literally came across the street and double blinded all of my glasses for me. And I smelled and tasted them all, and I picked which one was the best. And that's what the proof is. So.
Awesome. I'm on your website now. Does Clear Creek have your own website, or is it part of the?
So we will. I think it's totally fair game now. We haven't posted anything on the Instagram page yet, but I did manage to sneak them on TV the other day. We're actually going through like a new packaging, and kind of a rebranding is not really a fair statement, because like the ethos and the idea, the liquid and everything behind Clear Creek are staying the same, but we're getting a new website and all new packaging. Those are getting bottled kind of as we speak. And so hopefully the new packaging you'll start to see rolling out across the country over the next month or so. This is the second time we've done it. In the last 10 years, it's always a little lopsided. In fact, it was maybe only 4 months ago. I had a friend send me a picture of a bottle of Blue Plum brandy from like a liquor store in Tennessee that was the like OG packaging. And I was like, wow, it's good to know that there's a bottle or two of those still hanging around somewhere in a dusty corner. But the new packaging is really beautiful. And so I think I'm hoping in the next couple months that Clear Creek will have its own standalone website as well.
Very cool. And so just for me to understand, Hood River is the portfolio. It's the name of the parent companies. It's like a DI.
Yeah. So to explain the relationships a little bit better, I use the solar system. Everybody's familiar with how it's organized. Hood River Distillers is the sun. They have all the Monarch brands and everything like that. And then all the different brand houses kind of have their own different planet. Clear Creek Saturn, because it's the dopest. And I was the one that came up with this idea. So that means I get to pick the best one. And then realistically, even though McCarthy's was part of the original Clear Creek lineup, it's really being treated more like an independent brand. So I kind of assign McCarthy's the rings around Saturn because it's still really important to the story of Clear Creek and why we do what we do and how we make what we make. But there are McCarthy's specific events now and Clear Creek specific events now. And so they're kind of diverging a little bit. And then Saturn has a bunch of moons, right? So kind of Trails End would be one of those moons where Clear Creek is heavily involved, but it's not within the main portfolio of Clear Creek itself, but all of us within the solar system of Hood River Distillers.
So when things are distilled, they are distilled in Clear Creek. Clear Creek is the distillery that makes the stuff.
We also have a sister distillery up in Seattle called Captive Spirits, and they make Big Gin, which is a really beautiful London Dry gin. And then he has a few different aged versions of that London Dry as well. So not just Clear Creek. There is a gin distillery up in Seattle.
Okay, good to know. But McCarthy's is made at Clear Creek.
Correct.
And Trails End is finished at Clear Creek.
Correct.
Perfect. Okay, good.
I know it's a big twisted web.
No, it all makes sense now that I understand.
Sure. Yeah. Sure. The third Trails End that we have for you is the Trails End 10. Same great bourbon, just 2 years older. So this has not made it doesn't come to Oregon until it's been 10 years old. Again, we're using Oregon oak, but this time instead of those toasted Oregon oak icicles, those staves, we're actually using whole Oregon oak casks. So 2 years older, 10's a great number.
How long is the finish on each of these? I don't think we talked about it.
We reuse the casks a couple times, so the finish length changes over time. The first one is much shorter. The last one is much longer. I think that's really all I'm allowed to tell you. The finish takes as long as it takes to make Trails End 10. So
our favorite timetable is when it's ready.
Yeah, I mean, for a consumer, absolutely. Please don't bottle it until it's ready. As a producer, it's infuriating because, the bottling plant and the sales team were like, when is it going to be ready? And I'm like, it's going to be ready when it's going to be ready. Like, I can taste it today. I can give you a guesstimate of maybe when I think it's going to be ready. But those barrels and the bourbon within them have a mind of their own, and it's going to be ready when it's ready. And that's really how we developed it. When we put it in the casks initially, we just tasted it every day. And then there was just one day where we were like, I think it's there. It's like, I think we're happy with it. I think this is what we're going to call ready.
Okay.
And again, 2 years older, it's a really beautiful 10-year-old bourbon, but that Oregon oak just majorly turns up the volume on the like roasty toastiness. You get a lot of I get a lot of pecans, like kind of buttered pecans, dark chocolate, French toast, those like cherry leather, those kinds of things, all innately in that beautiful bourbon, but just accentuated and brought to life by the finish with the Oregon oak.
So as far as the age statement for both, and I'm sorry, this is basic, but that refers to the age statement for what it's aged at in Kentucky. the finish.
Yeah. So bourbon
changes however you need it.
Right. The bourbon aging works based on its original virgin cask. So if we were to take 2-year bourbon out of its original barrel and then put it into another barrel for 25 years, it would still be 2-year-old bourbon finished for 25 years and whatever that other cask would be, right? So once you pull that initial liquid out of its initial container, it stops aging as bourbon. So this was fully aged 10-year-old bourbon that we then pulled out of those barrels and finished in Oregon oak casks. It's not in the Oregon oak for long enough that we feel the need to put it on the label how much effort we put into finishing it. What's more important is that it's a 10-year-old bourbon.
And how much of the aging for these is in Kentucky versus in Oregon?
All of the aging. I think we've been making Trails End since like 2016, I think. And in all those years, I think maybe 1 or 2 shipment, and they come in whole barrels. So they're not like decanted into tanks and then sent here. They come shipped loose, which is bazonkers still. And I can see Anna looking at me. Yeah, loose. Just loose in a truck. It's the weirdest thing I've ever seen. That's just as a casual side note, it's nice to have when you have a lot of money and then you can, lobby Congress and stuff like that. Because if you are shipping that volume of alcohol in containers, that's a hazmat shipment. But if you're shipping it in barrels in a truck, as long as it's in a barrel, it's not a hazmat shipment.
I thought it was illegal to sell barrels unless I guess it's a distillery to distillery, so you can do it. But like,
yeah,
I can't buy a barrel of whiskey, right? Like,
no. And it's all as far as the FET and everything like that. It's a bond to bond transfer between distilleries. But as far as the Department of Transportation is concerned, if that liquid volume was in a tank, hazmat. If that liquid volume is split up amongst like 150-gallon barrels, wooden barrels, not hazmat.
Yeah. Wood doesn't burn.
Is it not on, it's not on pallets, it's not on racks, it's not on, what the okay, sorry. Sorry.
Yeah, just standing barrels in a trailer. Anyways, we've gotten really in the weeds on that one. There's only a handful of times
bring on the weeds.
But
where we've received truckloads of barrels from Kentucky where they coasted over the finish line by like 4 or 6 weeks in our facility. The 99.9% of the aging is happening in rick houses in Kentucky. Based on just like for logistics alone, sometimes they need to get them out the door and then they sit in our warehouse for 2 weeks before they're ripe and then we harvest them.
So as far as the effects of Oregon on it is just the barrel. It's not like the terroir. There's no claim that okay.
It is just the finishes. And it hasn't released yet, so I wasn't able to get you guys samples of it, but we are actually releasing a porter barrel finish. Hopefully in 6 weeks. I think we're going to try to pull those barrels in the middle of October. So that should be hitting shelves in about 6 weeks. And so that one, we're kind of diving into the rich brewing history of the Pacific Northwest. Kind of little known fact, we're all so familiar with craft brewing being a part of our lives and a part of our drinking industry. In 1984, there was less than 50 breweries across the country, not 50 craft breweries, 50 breweries across the United States in 1984. And by 1998, that was over 1,500. And now we're sitting over 9,500 breweries across the United States. So at various times in that really short amount of history, as far as craft brewing goes, Portland, Oregon had more breweries per capita than any other place in the world. I think right now we're sitting at number 8 behind Portland, Maine, which is first, and Bend, Oregon, which is third on that list at the moment. But we really wanted to kind of honor that brewing heritage. And so we have a porter barrel finish to the Trails End, which digs like even further into those toasty, roasty notes.
We did a barrel pick of a bourbon a few months back in last year in September. And when that empty barrel arrived, I gave it to a local brewery and they aged their porter in it. And so I have some of that porter beer aged in our whiskey barrel. That's
Super
really
good, right?
Yeah, it's good. Very sweet. I tend to find bourbon barrel aged beers to be a little too sweet for my palate. The vanilla kind of overpowers it to me. But people love it. And on nitro, it goes down so easy.
Oh, I'm a sucker for anything that's on nitro.
Yeah.
Well, is there any other Trails End related questions? If not, we best move on to the McCarthy's.
So Trails End, go ahead.
Sorry, is it the same source from Kentucky for the 10 and the 8?
Yes.
So how do you decide when to say, hey, send me the 8-year or send me the 10-year?
I mean, we've been buying, we have been buying and continue to buy stocks of 8-year once they've, been put into barrels and tucked away in Kentucky. And so, you try to do your best to forecast how much you're going to need. But I mean, with the 10-year and the 8-year, we're trying to guess how much 10-year or 8-year we're going to need in 10 and 8 years. So sometimes we have too much, sometimes we don't have anywhere near enough, which was really the problem. Towards the end of last year, we just ran out and we couldn't go back in time and buy more. So we sold what we had, and then we hope to, it's not the worst problem to be selling out, but that's where all the math comes in.
Sure. Yeah, the whiskey math is insane.
The idea is to always have it on the shelves and never run out.
Yeah.
Good luck. Sometimes that works and sometimes it doesn't.
Yeah. I don't know. I don't want to keep, I know that information is proprietary. I'm just trying to, you're buying whiskey from a distillery that's already making whiskey and you're just buying their barrels, or is it custom made for you guys on order? Like by your specs?
I believe it's just bourbon that they have.
Okay.
It is not specifically for Trails End mash bill. No.
Okay, gotcha. All right. Apparently you guys have
realistically the barrel selection is definitely for Trails End, because even the same mash bill, depending on how it's been aged and where it's been aged, you'll get different kind of flavor profiles from that aging process. So I would say that where the barrels come from matters, but the mash bill itself is not a specific to Trails End mash bill.
Okay, very cool. And is this widely available throughout the U.S., California, other places?
As far as I know, yes. And also, I'm going to forget the name all of a sudden. We are going to have an online retailer that should be going live hopefully in the next month or so. Big Thirst. So that will make it a lot easier for everyone else to find some of these specialty bottlings.
Okay.
And as far as I know, it will include Trails End as well as the whole Clear Creek line and a number of other things that Hood River Distillers has.
Oh, very cool.
Mm-hmm.
Apparently there's a 50 ml mini at Mission that you guys did, the 8-year.
Mm-hmm. The 8-year's been around for, like, that's, again, the 8-year's the OG, right? So the Trails End 10 didn't come out until maybe the end of 2021. The apple cask, I want to say, was maybe middle of last year. It's fairly new still. And the porter barrel being the next iteration that's coming out, like I said, in 6 weeks. So the 8-year's been like doing the lion's share of the work for a very long time. And it's just now starting to kind of expand that family.
And I have to ask, since we were talking about the pear brandy before we hit record, any plans to toss this in a pear brandy barrel and see what happens?
We do get that question asked a lot. We don't actually, there may or may not be a couple little barrels of pear brandy kind of kicking around in the barrel room. I don't necessarily care for it personally, and Clear Creek on the whole hasn't ever really cared for aged brandy personally. We work really hard to preserve all that like fresh, beautiful, juicy pear brandy. And there's some trade-offs with barrel aging, and so you lose that bright freshness, and you're gaining those toasted spices, those vanilla characteristics and stuff that you would get from the French oak that we would likely age it in. But to us, it's not really a fair trade. So we've never done it a lot. We got kind of our arms twisted by some whiskey nerds and I love them a great deal. So I'm gonna call them whiskey nerds with a grimace on my face, and did put a couple barrels away. So maybe those will see the light of day in a couple of years, but certainly not to the extent that we'd be willing to do a full scale Trails End rollout and some pear brandy finished barrels. Maybe someday there'll be a single barrel or two, but.
So I guess it comes down to you essentially the brandies that you age is the apple. That's why you have both.
Yeah, apple, and then we have an Oregon wine brandy. So it's spirit made from wine that we've bought from local wineries and then aged in French oak casks.
Gotcha. Okay, very cool. This is delicious. Tasty.
I'm glad you like it. The Trails End 10 is my favorite. I can never remember the name of the restaurant. Shame on me. But there's a place or two places. There's two restaurants. They do a pho fat washed Trails End old fashioned with Chinese 5 spice, and it's the best thing I've ever had. Every time I go up to Seattle, I make a point to go there with our sales rep just so I can order that cocktail. The food is amazing as well. Like, definitely eat the food, but that old fashioned is the best thing I've ever had.
What the fuck? I want to.
Wait, which restaurant is this?
No, I know. I'm gonna have to send a note to Bree. I can never remember the name of
Okay.
it. I'll send her a text right now, and maybe
Okay,
I'll
good,
get it
'cause-
into the record. But I do every
So.
time I go to Seattle. I make a point. Like, Bree and I go there for dinner, just mostly so I can have one or two of those cocktails.
I know a couple of people that are in Seattle that I think should be invited to your dinner next time.
The last time I was
Adam
in Seattle, we were
and
so
Kaylee.
busy. I did manage to go out and see Anna while I was there, but I was up there for Seattle Cocktail Week, and I didn't hardly have a moment to my own for that entire weekend.
Is it Monsoon Restaurant that does the funky old fashioned faux fat wash Trails and bourbon, 5 spice syrup, chocolate bitters, and served over ice?
That sounds like it, but that doesn't sound like the name of the restaurant.
Oh, interesting. That was just what Google told me, an old friend of mine. He's my inside hookup for a lot of things.
Nice. All right. Any other Trails End questions? I feel like we're stealing some time for McCarthy's here at this point.
We got plenty of time, but yeah, let's move on to McCarthy's.
Okay, great. I already touched on
Wait,
a little bit.
Is it Babar that does the old fashioned faux fat wash Trails and bourbon, cardamom?
See, that one sounds a little bit more familiar. I don't know. I'll have Bree. Bree will.
How many places do a fat wash bourbon?
I thought it was only the two, but I've only been to one of them, which is
It might
like
be related as well.
Yeah, no, they're the two that I know of they're like a family of restaurants.
Okay.
No, it's not Babar, it's Babar. That's why I didn't sound right at first.
Sorry,
It's
yeah,
Babar.
Babar. Like the
Yeah.
like the elephant.
Yeah.
What order should we put the McCarthy's in?
Right.
I'm assuming
So the McCarthy's 3-year-olds, and then I think I sent you the 6 and the PX.
yeah,
So it should go 3-year, 6-year, and then the PX sherry finish.
perfect. Okay.
I think I touched on, Babar. She's quick. I touched a little bit on the history of Clear Creek earlier, founded in 1985 by Steve McCarthy. Really, everything that we make is because he wanted to and because we can. I'd love to tell you that there is a better, cooler, more invigorating story, but that's really it. And so, as the story goes, Steve had been running the distillery in downtown Portland in Northwest Portland for a number of years. He finally had a chance to sneak away on vacation, and him and his wife, Lucinda Parker, were avid hikers and adventurers. And so they made a plan to do like a long week of hiking through Ireland. And lucky them, they actually had a friend that had, a cabin in Ireland. And so they were going to use that as their home base while they did all their exploring. Well, it turns out it was pouring down rain. And I I kind of ham this up a little bit because it's like, yeah, of course it was pouring down rain. It's Ireland. That's literally all it does there. They get 90 inches of rain annually. Oh no, it's pouring down rain. What are we gonna do? I guess we'll have to help ourselves to our friend's elaborate single malt collection that they happen to have in this cabin instead of going and walking through the rain. Oh darn. But that is kind of actually what happened. Apparently it was pouring down rain to the extent that it was even more than what one might expect from a hiking trip in Ireland. And so for 3 or 4 days, you had a rare opportunity to go through and really get well acquainted with the single malt offerings at the time. And by the time they got on the flight back home, he was like, well, I've got this little distillery in Northwest Portland. And well, there's barley that grows in Oregon, and there's peat in Oregon. And now that this whole craft brewing thing is a thing, I could probably find somebody to do peat malted barley. Wouldn't it be dope if I came back home and made an Oregon single malt? And so that's what he set out to do, just because that was his favorite style of single malt was a smoky peaty single malt. And so he's like, well, I'll just make one. I made pear brandy because I love it. Why don't I make a single malt because I love it? And when he came back, he reached out to a few of the local small malt houses in the Portland area, and he told them what his idea was. And they looked at him and said, huh? Yeah, it's a great idea. No way are we ever doing that for you. Because once you put that peat reek into a malt house, into a malting system, there's no way that you can remove it from that system. Every craft beer that would have come out of Portland would have been a smoky, peaty craft beer. And so at the time, the only alternative for him to still see out his vision was to import that peat malted barley from Scotland, which is what we still do today. Like we've talked about, I do see that there's a few new faces on this that weren't on the brandy tasting, but Clear Creek is largely a brandy distillery. We process over 1 million pounds of Pacific Northwest fruit and turn it into all manners of fruit brandy throughout the year. So we don't actually have grain handling facilities within our building. So we have, throughout the history of McCarthy's, always worked with brewery partners to brew our wash for us, which we then distill on our German pot stills, on our hybrid German pot stills, which is one level of uniqueness. We're using a single pass brandy still to distill a single malt. And then we're aging it 100% in Oregon oak casks. Oregon oak was kind of always the idea. The first ever barrel to ever age an American single malt, which was at Clear Creek Distillery in 1995 when we first started distilling McCarthy's, was a French oak cask because that's all Steve had at the time. But soon after that was when we started sourcing all those beautiful Oregon oak casks. And McCarthy's itself is a really big and bold spirit because it's that single distillation hybrid pot still. It's a really heavy spirit. There's a lot of oils that come through in that distillation. And what should be an all-out war in the glass between the Oregon oak, which is in itself a really big and bold oak, even for a finishing oak, let alone for 100% aging, and then pitting it up against this really heavy smoky spirit, you should be able to taste the murder that's happening in there as they're fighting for who is the most powerful in that drink. But instead, what you get is they both really play into each other's hands, and it's this really beautiful harmony in the glass. Nobody's really fighting for prevalence. There's the kind of wispy smoke that comes through an old growth forest. You're getting some of those like peach and apricot aromas, and then they're rounded out with the kind of toasty earthiness from the peat and the barley itself. It's really this kind of beautiful cohesive drink in a glass. For a really long time, we only had the 3-year. The 3-year is what initially kind of got us into the news media. Steve never had, we traditionally had a $0 marketing budget for 30 years. Clear Creek spent $0 on marketing and advertising. We had 3 salespeople, and they would travel across the country and do work with and talk to restaurateurs and bar managers and taste them on what we had. And Jim Murray, the writer for and the idea behind the Whiskey Bible, in 2007 and 2008, both years ranked our 3-year McCarthy single malt as the #1 whiskey in the world. And so what was a growing product for us all of a sudden we couldn't keep in the distillery. And so it was a really long time before we were able to keep up with demand to the extent that we could lay down some to release older expressions. And so with, McCarthy's being first offered in 1998, the 6-year, which is only, twice the age, was only first offered at the end of 2021. So it took us quite a bit of time to actually be able to start releasing those older formats, and then maybe do some playing around with some of these single barrels and then sherry cask finishes. We used to, and when we were in Portland, the tasting room was attached to the distillery, and so whiskey release day was like a whole thing. And Joseph, my predecessor, Joseph Sullivan, our previous master distiller, who's now at Minden Mills down in Nevada, he was there for a whiskey release where a guy had driven up to Portland from Arizona for our McCarthy's, really the only one that we were going to have that year, and waited in line with everybody else outside. And by the time he came in, and granted, this was literally 15 minutes after we opened, we were sold out of every bottle that we had in the tasting room. And he actually broke down in tears and was like, what are you telling me? You sold out. I drove all the way here from Arizona just to get 2 bottles of this whiskey. And the staff at the time was so heartbroken and so moved by this poor man that they actually went upstairs and raided Steve's office and stole 2 out of his personal case so they could sell it to him. But I used to always work the phone, so I've broken many a heart over the phone when we've sold out of McCarthy's after 20 minutes, and people they're like, what do you mean you're sold out? It's been 20 minutes. And it's like, sorry. What does everybody think of the 3 years so far? Any questions, comments? It's a big, bold whiskey. It's smoky, it's peaty.
It's just taking me a minute to wrap my head around all the conundrums that are happening. You went to Ireland and came back with a peated single malt. Like, that's not the Irish style either. Like, what
well, I think it was the friend was a fan of Scottish single malts. Okay. And he just happened to be in Ireland.
Okay.
Yeah, so it was a single malt collection that happened to live in a cabin in Ireland.
It's a very bold nose.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's not something that you're like. I don't think even the distillery staff has ever just done shots of McCarthy's. It's definitely something that you pour in a glass and read a good book to, or sit next to a wonderful fire, or it's something that you kind of savor and ponder over.
Originally, it was Lafroy, no?
Could you say that again? I couldn't quite hear you.
Originally, the source for the barley was like Lafroy, no?
No, we've never bought, the spirit's never been purchased from Scotland. We import the peat malted barley from Scotland.
No, I mean the peated barley was from Lafroy.
We were getting it from Port Elland and now from Baird's.
And what did you say was the lifetime of the 3-year-old? It was finished in Oregon oak, or spent the whole time in Oregon oak?
Whole time, 100% Oregon oak and new and used casks.
Oh, wow. How big are your batches? How many casks?
It depends on how many are ripe, and it depends on how many releases we do. Sometimes we used to try to only do 1 release every year, and back in the day, it was every barrel that was 3 years old went into the blend. There was no blending. It was just whatever we had went into the blend. That was the blend. Now we take a little bit more time and a little bit more care. I'm a bit of a stickler for really good finishes. And so if there's something in that blend where you add it in and all of a sudden it's like, it smells like McCarthy's, it tastes like McCarthy's, and then it's just like, whoomp, there's just nothing, then I'm like, nope, this one's not going to sail. I'm sorry. There has to have this beautiful, long lingering finish. So we do take our time a little bit more. I think this year we only had 1 release, but the year previous we had 2. Sometimes it's 14 barrels. Sometimes it's 4 or 6. It just depends.
Yeah, Jane was right. It's not medicinal, but it's definitely earthy and ashy on the finish.
Mhm.
Very interesting.
Yeah, it doesn't have any of those like overwhelming iodine notes either.
Absolutely.
I actually recently, the word peat is a very polarizing word when you go to a tasting event, and so I definitely want to make sure that when I'm describing McCarthy's to a potential taster, that I say it's a very smoky, peaty whiskey. But then they hear that peat word, and then they're like, "Oh, I'm going to run for my life," because I swear, every dad in the 70s and 80s all shared a sip from just one awful bottle of scotch, and it tastes awful and like wet ashtray. And then a whole swath, like all millennials and most of Gen Xers grew up with their dads complaining that scotch is awful and tastes like wet ashtray and blah, blah, blah. And so it's now that's like, there's so many people that have never even tried the category and they're just like, nope, I know I'm not going to like it. And I was at this event and you just never know what's going to fall out of your mouth. But this person was trying to get me to like explain even more about what the flavor and aroma might be before they were even willing to taste it. And I was like, okay, it's not like going and visiting your grandpa in his like barnyard, which can be the descriptors that you might use for a smoky, peaty Scotch whiskey. Instead, I said, it's like going on a campfire or going to a campfire with your friends, but in Fangorn Forest. Because it does have this really kind of, you're a distance away from the campfire amount of smoke. You're not, when it's new make, it's like you're standing right above the fire and complaining to your buddies that no matter where you go, the smoke is following you. But the longer it ages in the barrel, the further and further away from that campfire you get. And the earthy quality that the McCarthy's has is really more akin to like forest loam, forest floor. Sometimes you can get some of those kind of more piney notes than like some of your more typical barnyard characteristics.
It does not taste like cigarettes and bad decisions, which is how I have described other peaty whiskeys when it's like, oh, that's way too ashy. This is not that. It's so well balanced. I love there's like a hint of brininess on it, not a lot, just enough to like round it out, give it a little bit lift. Yeah.
Yep. This would actually be a really great time to bring up the American Single Malt Commission as you go ahead and start pouring your 6-year-old sample out into your glass. The American Single Malt Commission, I think there were 7 initial founding members, started in 2016. They kind of sent an email out to all the people that they knew were making American single malt at the time, and were like, "Hey, we think it would be a really great really great idea if we all got together and found a way to lobby for this to be a recognized category by the TTB and in the United States. Do you want to come?" Like throw your hat in the ring and let's be a part of this conversation. And out of all the distilleries they sent that note out to, 7 went, Steve Hawley being the president of the American Single Malt Commission, formerly of Westland up in Seattle. At that first meeting in the back of a Binny's in Chicago, essentially what now still stands today as the recommendation to the TTB from the American Single Malt Commission and what that category should be, largely still stand, even though it's grown from 7 members to over 100 members. It is an interesting side note that there are over 250 current American single malt producers across the country, and just over 100 are a part of the commission. But the commission grows every day as we hopefully tiptoe our way closer to getting that ratification of that standard of identity through the TTB. The really interesting and really cool part about the American Single Malt Commission and this new standard of identity is that it was defined by the producers. And it was defined to be open and to leave it up to the creativity of the distillery to define what American single malt means for them. In a lot of ways, the regulations around bourbon are cost prohibitive. It's really expensive to get into that. It's really difficult to be a new entrant into that market. But conversely, the way that the standard of identity for American single malt has been made, it honors the past of American single malt, where in large part, a lot of us were had brewing partners, because it's hard enough getting a small business up and going, a small distillery up and going. If you're able to work with the brewery next door, like Stranahan's was working with Flying Dog, they literally had a pipe that went from the brewery through the wall and into the distillery. And that's how a great many of the American single malt distilleries started, was with these brewing partners. And we still use a brewing partner to this day. And so those rules that have been kind of set down and suggested as the standard of identity for this category will allow, one, it's a new burgeoning market, which is huge. We haven't had a new standard of identity in forever. But two, it will really allow all of these distilleries to express the terroir and the taste of what American single malt means to them. Everything that Westland makes up in Seattle is very different from what we do at Clear Creek Distillery, despite there being a few things that we share in common when we talk about our whiskeys. I used to say in this speech, I look forward to the day that I can taste what the single malt made down in New Orleans tastes like. And as of this summer, I know what it tastes like. Atelier V down in New Orleans makes a beautiful American single malt. I don't know if he's got an online retailer, but if you're ever in New Orleans, like, ring his doorbell. Jeb's an amazing guy. Follow him on Instagram. His single malt is gorgeous. And so it's really wonderful for this category to have the creativity for new and have the ability for new entrants to come into this category relatively easily and then be creative within it. I hope that we have a standard of identity soon. And then I hope that there's no brand or taste or aroma that becomes the standard of what American single malt is supposed to taste like, because it really should taste like what everybody thinks it should taste like. So yeah, if you haven't followed the American Single Malt Commission, they're a great follow on Instagram. They're always promoting all of us that are doing great things. And then we're, pretty much every day, all of us little distillers lay our sleepy little distiller heads down on a pillow and say, you know what, it wasn't today, but maybe tomorrow. Maybe tomorrow will be the day that we'll get the news that the standard of identity has been ratified by the TTB. So hopefully moments away. You've hopefully tried the 6-year McCarthy's at this point in time. Same great story, same great taste, twice as old. So 6 years old in Oregon oak casks. You get that you lose some of those green kind of hay-like notes, and what you gain is this like further richness, more of those vanilla. It's a lot easier to pick up that like burnt twist of orange peel that comes with the Oregon oak characteristic. It is important to note that in the American Whiskey Magazine, both I just spilled my water. Both the 3-year and the 6-year both got 92 points, and unfortunately, we didn't make a whole lot of the Oloroso, but it was rated the highest, which was a huge thing for us, the Oloroso cask finish. Also, that was the first blend that our distiller Garrett Trotter ever put together. So we're proud parents of a new blender distiller, and that his first blend out on market scored a whopping 95 points. So if you're able to track down one of those Olorosos, there's still a few on the shelves, but we're pretty excited about it. But the PX that you have to try last is, I love the Oloroso, but the PX is my favorite.
I really love how the Gariana comes through on this one more than some of the others. Just like that earthy spice note. I get it a lot on the finish more than anything, but I really love how that like plays so well with the smoke, and it's just such an awesome balance.
Yeah, we have no right to have both of those strong flavors work so well in the glass, and we just like got really super lucky in that they seem to be made for each other. Yeah, Vadim, I think that, I was on a symposium about smoked whiskeys over the weekend, and that was kind of something, that was a comment that I was relating to the group, is that you don't necessarily lose the smoky characteristic, but it like transforms into a depth of character over time. And so the overt smokiness becomes more subtle, like you've walked further and and further away from the campfire, but it also adds this kind of like seasoning to all the other flavors that are in that spirit. And so it lifts everything kind of up as it kind of fades away.
There is a pic of yours at the K&L, and someone whose palate I trust very much said that was the best bottle he got from K&L this year, and he goes through a lot of bottles. I tossed it in the chat. It's your peated single malt aged in.
It's going to be Oregon Oak. I don't think they got anything. I think they got a special release.
He loved it. Still available.
And it's on sale, so I bought one.
There you go. You were saying that
Blueberries are a lot of fun.
coming into a whiskey distillery. So does that mean single malt allows for hops in the mash bill?
Mm-mm.
No. Okay. I was gonna say
No, that's beer
that's-
schnapps.
Sorry.
That's beer schnapps.
Okay. Figured. Yeah.
Or beer brand, or the other millions of names that a distilled finished beer spirit comes by. I may or may not know some about that as well.
Beer schnapps sounds like the greatest insult I haven't used yet. So I'm going to a lot of people beer schnapps. So thank you.
There is one song on beer schnapps, like on Spotify. It's called what is it? It's like Beer Schnapps Anthem or something like that. It is entirely fantastic and completely obnoxious. I may or may not have had a few attempts at trying to convince a few people within our company that we should be selling a beer schnapps. And I may or may not have had that song playing on repeat in the background of that meeting, and nobody noticed. Nobody noticed, but Joseph and I loved it. It was our own secret little Easter egg. But yeah, it played for like an hour on repeat. Nobody noticed.
The salty note on this is giving me like the end of a McDonald's French fry or Ruffles potato chip, in that I want to like go back and get more. You know, it's not like salty, just giving me that like, ooh, craveable. I need some more of that, rather than hitting too much salt. I really like it.
Yeah, this is one of those ones, like, there's a lot of whiskeys that I enjoy, but I love a whiskey that seems to call me back to the glass the most, right? When you're just, you've had your sip, maybe you're doing something else, and then it's just, you get a certain way through the finish and you're like, oh boy, I think I'd like to have another sip. And you don't even really realize it's this unconscious pull to have another sip of that whiskey. Those are my favorites.
You're subconsciously getting us to drink more whiskey. I see how it is.
Sorry.
It's like it's a business, Vadim. It's really weird.
I'm just your, smiley itinerant poison seller.
Speaking of McDonald's, right?
Well, I think now we're probably ready for you guys to try your PX cask finish. So PX stands for Pedro Jimenez. It is the name of the grape that makes the sherry in Spain. That is aged in, I believe these ones were lightly charred American oak casks for 2 years. And it is drained mostly. There's a little bit of sherry that they leave in those casks for their long journey from Spain. And then they're shipped across the world and land on our doorstep. And then we finish the 6-year-old McCarthy's in it. So the McCarthy's that goes into the Pedro Jimenez or the Oloroso, those are specialty blends that we do before the finish. So there's a specific set of things that we're looking at for the Oloroso, and there's a specific things that we're looking for when we're pulling together a blend of McCarthy's. Generally speaking, you want to play into, again, when you talk about those finishes, how you are planning on finishing a whiskey, whether it's the trail's end and you're trying to figure out which strings to enhance. The same thing goes for McCarthy's. And when you're looking at all these potential sherry finishes, is what you're trying to highlight. What are you trying to maneuver what that spider graph is going to look like? And so with the PX sherry finish, we're really playing into a lot of those kind of sweeter, fruitier characteristics. Your like sun golds, or the golden raisins and dried apricots and fruit leathers. There's a little bit of sweetness that kind of tones back some of the burn of the alcohol, but it's just like whiskey sunshine in a glass. And in my opinion, the best sip of whiskey to go with a cigar. Realistically, even over our 15-year-old apple brandy, which has been to date the most cigar-worthy spirit out of the distillery until this last cigar that we had. We all went to PX instead of the 15-year-old apple brandy.
I like how this one isn't overly sherried. Like that can be my
No.
issue with stuff, but it is like just the right amount of fruit and just the right amount of sweetness to kind of round out that edge and just lift it.
Caitlin, how long did it spend in sherry?
I think it was like 4 or 5 months. Again, all of this is just when it's done. So we popped in on those casks after the first like 6 weeks because we knew it wasn't going to happen in less than 6 weeks. And then we would, go in and have a taste every week or 10 days. And then one day it was like, yep, well, this is done. The balance is right. Thankfully, we are a small enough distillery that we can do that. We can take that kind of time. We can instead of churning out hundreds and hundreds of barrels of this stuff where you can't take necessarily the time to taste them all every week and decide when they're all ready. We can do that. And that means that everything that we put in a bottle is always going to be the best it can possibly be.
Be the best you can be. I like that slogan. Somebody should use that. As many people in the chat have pointed out, it's time to raise a glass and turn on your camera and get Shane and Lucas and Tom on the call. Galan. Hopefully they're all paying attention. Yes, Shane's paying attention. Look at that beautiful face. There you go. All right. Caitlin, you got to pour yourself something.
Yeah, I know. I was drinking water like a loser. It's been a long day and tomorrow's going to be even longer. But I can drink water out of a really nice glass.
There you go. You can have one dram with us. You dram with us. There we go. Galan's drinking out of a bottle. There you go.
There we go. There's liquid in here.
There you go. Out of a beaker. I like that.
No, it's I grew up a century wheat farmer, and you collect things. I can't think it was my great grandmother or my grandmother. This is an antique like clawfoot whatever glass display. Whatever, it's being kind of maligned in the corner of my house, but I've got this full set of like wheat glasses and I've only pulled 2 of them out and the rest of them are all wrapped up in bubble wrap in storage. But it's a very special occasion glass.
Well, beautiful. Well, thank you for pulling that out. Well, I invite everyone to raise a glass and say cheers to Caitlin. Thank you for being here, spending the evening with us. Cheers.
Thank you.
Got it. The shot got Caitlin right in the act of drinking. Let me do one more. Everyone raise a glass and smile to the camera. Beautiful. Awesome. And then I do have a couple of polls, so hopefully everyone's paying attention now that we got you here. Let's toss this one out. Should have done that at the three drink mark, but curious, what was your favorite Trails End expression that we tried? As I sipped this PX. I just recently discovered the world of PX casks, and I've discovered how much I love them. The nuttiness of a PX cask just sings for me.
Yeah, I never had a more sincere Fraser moment than when we first started tasting through all the sherries to try to decide which one we were going to use first. And then I was like, oh, apparently I'm a sherry fan. I like all of a sudden I got it.
Caitlin, did you vote for your favorite Trails End?
No, I'm not going to vote.
Why not?
Because I don't know, because it would just be weird if I voted. I just clicked
Pick
out.
your child. Pick your child.
Pick the middle one. We know that's a favorite. All right, we got most people voted. 3, 2, 1. Did you vote? I don't want to hear complaints later. Everyone voted? All right. Looking at you. Make sure everybody voted. All right, 3, 2, 1, closing. And then while I tally up the votes, please vote for your favorite McCarthy's expression. Let's do that. And I think this would be a weird poll, but favorite overall, let me put that up. It's going to be a weird combination of bourbon and peated malt, but we'll see what happens.
Yeah, it's kind of you don't necessarily see bourbons and single malts in the same tasting flight together, but it's a lot of fun.
I think this is a good tasting because it makes everybody happy, and it showcases the full spectrum of the flavors you can produce out there. So that's really cool. Did everybody vote? See, oh, we're doing this on the fly. On the fruit fly. Bring it back. Bring it back. All right, we're gonna close that one out. Oh, more people voted on this one than they did in the last one. Wow.
Yeah, because I voted in this one because you told me to.
Good. On the Trails End, people, well, it wasn't just you. There was less people that voted Trails End too. All right. So I'll do all three. So let's pick your favorite thing you tasted tonight. Just the one. You got to pick one. All right. Wow, the 6-year PX is really interesting. The nose is totally different too.
I really like whenever I'm doing tasting notes, I would put a watch glass over the glass so that you're kind of building up the aroma within the empty space of the glass, and then like sneak it off and get my nose in there and figure out what's just kind of been volatilizing within the container. And then I'll smell, and I'll taste, and then I'll leave it uncovered and walk away from it for 15 or 20 minutes. And then I come back and give it a swirl and smell it again. And I'm always interested in what becomes apparent with that rest period, and once the like more volatile things have kind of blown off, and those kind of deeper notes that you're able to have access to afterwards, I like the contrast between both.
Very cool. All right, so as is tradition for us, now that everyone has voted, what do you think was the group's favorite bourbon tonight?
Oh, a favorite bourbon.
Yeah.
I'm gonna say it was the apple.
So 67, 2/3 voted for the 10-year and 1/3 voted for the apple. There you go. Not bad. All right, what do you think was the group's favorite malt?
PX, just because it's my favorite.
And you are correct.
Yeah.
55% voted for PX, 36% for the 6-year. Hey, and then you got 1 vote for the 3-year. Who was that?
The 3-year is good. It's it's the stalwart.
It's the punchy one. It's like I'd liken it to Wee Beastie, where like if you want a punchy peated single malt, that's where you go.
Just as a side note, McCarthy's makes a really good pie, and it's great in molasses cookies because I cook with everything that we make a lot because it's just around.
That's right. I still need to ask you about recipes because you talked about that this weekend. Yes, I want them.
Yeah, actually, I did a sales training with our sales team fairly recently. We went over all the apple brandies and Trails End, and I talked about the reason behind some of the apple brandies that we have, and there was a real big culinary push to have like our 2-year apple was mostly meant to be cooked with, and the sales team was like, maybe we should start talking about like putting together some like cooking recipes for some of the Clear Creek brandies. And I was like, yes, we should. I'll finally get to use all those cookbooks that I've been hoarding for years.
They do cocktail recipes. I think that would be a big hit.
I cook with our spirits a lot.
I can think of at least 2 people on this call that would totally be in for that.
There's nothing like deglazing the frond on a pan with some beautiful apple brandy and then pouring it over, a steak or some lamb chops or whatever. Like, yeah.
Say more things.
The McCarthy's pie, the pie, I've made 2 different versions of it. One McCarthy's and then one out of our Douglas fir eau de vie. It works well in both cases. Both with the
Wait.
drizzle.
Back up. What do you do in a pie? What kind of pie are you putting the Douglas fir in?
So have you ever heard of a grasshopper pie? It's kind of like it's like an old school, you don't see it very often. You get heavy whipping cream and marshmallows, and you melt the marshmallows in the cream, let it come to room temperature. While it's doing that, you whip up some more whipped cream, unsweetened, and then you fold your milk and marshmallow mixture in with the whipped cream and also all of the alcohol. And then you put it in a graham cracker crust and freeze it. And with both of them, I do a dark chocolate drizzle over the top. I just thin it out with a little bit of vegetable oil, so it's not like super hard when it comes out of the freezer. It's got like a lot of give. But the kind of like fresh, like fruity, citrusy quality of the Doug fir works really well in that pie. And then the like smoky, like toasted oatmeal and like leather qualities work really well with the McCarthy's. They're both good.
So good, it's so young. Like you don't have a crazy climate like Virginia does or Taiwan does. You're obviously aging the Kentucky, the bourbon for 8 to 10 years. How is the McCarthy so mature and delicious at 3 to 6 years?
It's just I think it's kind of all of these really beautiful things coming together. I think a great deal of it has to do with our attention to detail when we're distilling. We were making very precise cuts. Every item, every still load that goes through Clear Creek all year long, every head's cut, somebody is smelling and making the decision when to start collecting the hearts every single time, which means that you're not getting any of those kind of harsher high notes. You're not getting those bitter tails notes if you were to go over and into your tails. It's very, very precise cuts. Again, we're the size that we are, and so we have the ability to be that specific and that precise about what we're doing. And then when in the case of the McCarthy's, these are really well seasoned copper pot stills. They're all 100% copper. The 2 of the 4 were born in 1985, or 3 of the 4 were born in 1985. One of the ones from 1985 we didn't acquire until the early 2000s, and then our 4th still we acquired in 2006 when we moved into our 2nd facility, which was the first expansion. And that was still, having been born in 2006, it's only really last year kind of come into its own and in our minds being properly seasoned. And what I mean by that is that over time you're reacting sulfur components with the copper and pulling them out of the whiskey. So if it was more stainless, you would be getting definitely more sulfur components, things that would be like recently lit match, meaty characteristics. And some of those will go away over time in a barrel. But because we're doing it in these really old, well-seasoned stills where enough copper has been sacrificed over time that there's these pits and rivulets that are cut into the main pot as well as the short column on these stills, that the spirit that we're initially getting as new make on the other side is, while not being completely free of sulfur components, because that's not the goal, certainly doesn't have the sulfurous impact that a new make from a newer still might have, that would help cue people into, oh, this is a really young spirit, because I can taste some of these meatier, kind of unrounded, unfinished notes in this young whiskey.
And you're doing a double distillation on the
Single distillation.
Wow.
So it's a really heavy spirit, but because of that extra amount of like copper surface area that we're getting because of those pits and rivulets cut into the copper itself, we're able to get this big, oily, very cleanly cut whiskey in a single pass.
Wow. And how are you separating? Is it a separate still that runs the McCarthy's, the peated, or are you doing like a thorough cleaning afterwards? Because
thorough cleaning. Yeah, it's really important for the stills to have the sulfur compounds that react out with the copper. They will build up on that surface of copper over time. So you do need to make sure that you clean those off and make sure that you have fresh copper to react to with the reflux. So we would be cleaning them no matter what anyways, but the McCarthy's always triggers a clean. So realistically, at this point in time, they all get cleaned after we've distilled some McCarthy's. I actually unloaded a fresh tanker today and did the first cycle of the next 7 days of making the next batch of McCarthy's. So as every time my hands come up close to my face, I'm like, oh yeah, I distilled McCarthy's today, because it really does kind of soak into your pores when you're distilling it. And our laundry baskets are kind of start to smell like bacon by the time you make it through the end of the week of distilling with McCarthy's, that like smoky quality. But yeah.
That's cool. Now that society is more open to local peat, have you looked into trying to get Oregon peated malt again?
The answer is always we 100% want to explore and find a way to see Steve's kind of initial vision all the way through. I think McCarthy's the flagship. I shouldn't say I think. I know that the flagship McCarthy's brand will always be from that imported peat malted barley in Scotland, because that's what McCarthy's tastes like now, right? If we were to change to Pacific Northwest malt and Pacific Northwest peat, it's going to taste really different. It's not going to taste like McCarthy's. I would love to see that line extension happen. I can tell you it's going to be at least 5 years away. But absolutely, I would love to see that happen, and we're actively working towards seeing that happen.
Okay, so you it's not like you've given up and moved on. You're still
No.
okay.
At this point, at this point in time, we're just it's just me at the distillery. So once we get a new staff trained up, we're going to get to start exploring some new fun things for a while.
Let's suggest some more things for you to do. I don't think you have enough.
No. I'm busy enough. Thank you very much. Today is going to be a 15-hour day, and hopefully tomorrow isn't quite that long.
Well, the favorite of the night, what do you think was the number one choice for this mixed group of people, whether they are corn drinkers or malt drinkers? What do you think was the number one takeaway?
I don't know. That's a really tough one. It's gonna obviously between the Trails End 10 and the single malt. I hope that because the PX is my favorite, although I do love the Trails End 10, I do hope that the PX wins tonight. Hooray!
At least I can do. The votes are all across the board, but 36% for the PX cask and 27% for the 6-year McCarthy's. So they're first and second. It's pretty good. It's pretty awesome. Oh, this is really interesting. Thank you so much. That was a lot.
No, thank you so much. I enjoyed the first one immensely. I have also enjoyed this one immensely. You guys have great questions, and I
dare not ask who you liked better as a host, because I don't think my ego can take that.
No, you both were wonderful, Jane. No, it's such a privilege to be able to share what I do with people that are interested in the fruits of my labor. So a huge thank you to you, Vadim. I hope that you have me on again to talk about apple brandies, and I think we can manage to come up with a few more after that if we really put our minds to it. But this is such a special privilege to spend time with you all.
I think for the apple brandy, we definitely have to get some kind of recipes ahead of time and get James to make something or something. Somebody make something. Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Caitlin. This has been
absolutely.
And cheers. And we look forward to having you back soon.
Great. All right. Thank you, everyone. Have a wonderful night.
Thank you. Good night.